What is the endgame? A great question and one with a pretty easy answer. The endgame, like the name implies, is content and grinding you do at the end of the current expansion or patch of the video game. But also not really, because the grinding can be done even if you aren't at the end of the game's current patch. So what is a better definition? My personal definition of endgame content goes like this. Single or multiplayer content that scales extremely high in difficulty, rewards the player for completion, and resets on a weekly basis. It is content that you complete and compete with other players in getting a higher score or placing higher on a leaderboard, while receiving rewards depending on how well you did. And the best place to get a sense of the endgame is to look at MMORPGs. Every single MMORPG has some sort of competitive endgame, be it timed 5-man dungeons where teams face off to see who can complete this dungeon the fastest, or 20-man raid groups going head-to-head to see which team can complete an entire raid the quickest, like in World of Warcraft. Even single-player games can have a semblance of an endgame. Take Assassin's Creed Unity for an example. The game had specific high-difficulty assassination missions where there are dozens of guards patrolling, eyes everywhere, and you need to find the one route that can finish the mission the fastest, and you could take them on solo or with other players and see if you get the fastest mission completion time while avoiding detection. But even mobile gacha games are able to have an endgame, and some even do. Tower climbing challenges where you try to climb to the highest floor for the weekly rewards, a boss rush system pitting you against bosses to see how fast you can defeat a single boss, PvP based arena, specific time missions seeing if you can get the lowest completion time. All these game modes follow the general principle of complete the task in the shortest amount of time possible. And the reason I give some examples of endgame content is because they can be made out of nothing as long as they follow one of two different designs or both. Design 1 is purely PvE content that scales extremely high that rewards the player for completion and resets weekly. Or Design 2, which is mostly PvP content that either has actual players fight each other with their characters, or has an active leaderboard where players must compete for higher rankings. And like I said, it can be either of these designs or both in one system. Genshin and Honkai Impact should have some sort of endgame due to them being live service character collector power fantasy games. And in this video, I'm going to take a look at exactly what is the endgame of both Genshin and Honkai, starting off with the one and only Genshin Impact. It is no surprise to those who have played or still play Genshin Impact that the game has no endgame. But for those who don't play it as much or haven't played it at all, Genshin falters in the endgame department. Spiral Abyss is the only endgame content in Genshin Impact. The general outline for Spiral Abyss is you go from floor 9 to floor 12, clearing chamber after chamber with 2 different teams. Each chamber giving you a buff card that can either affect only that chamber or the whole floor. Enemy variety and level increases to in turn increase the difficulty, and depending on how well you do on a floor depends on what reward you get. At the start of each floor, you will have to form together 2 different teams to best deal with the enemies in that floor. At the beginning of each floor and chamber, you will choose a buff card that either only affects this chamber or it can affect the whole floor. And I should also note that re-entering the floor doesn't reset the card options, they are always static. You will start as Team 1 and go through killing enemies as quickly as possible. You can see what times you have to beat on the side of the screen. Once you beat all enemies as Team 1 on floor 9, chamber 1, you switch to Team 2 on floor 9, chamber 1. The buff card you chose as Team 1 also applies to Team 2, and you do the same process of killing enemies as quickly as possible to beat the times on the side of the screen. After you beat all the enemies as Team 2 on floor 9, chamber 1, you will move on to floor 9, chamber 2, where the same process is repeated. Play as Team 1, pick up a buff card, beat all the enemies, switch to Team 2, beat all the enemies, proceed to the next chamber. Each floor only has 3 chambers, so in total it's 12 chambers, but because each chamber is split into 2 teams, it's 24 total combat sequences. Floor 9 and 10 generally have some weird affixes that don't really do anything. Floor 11 has a cycling buff that changes unpredictably, giving random buffs to characters like more claymore damage or more hydro damage bonus. And floor 12 generally has no affixes. miHoYo did try adding one a few patches ago, it wasn't that popular, thus it was removed. Getting a higher quote-unquote rating is simple in Spiral Abyss. Spiral Abyss works on a star collection system. Per chamber you have 3 stars that can be gotten, and for the most part it is to complete that chamber within a certain time. I should also note that time is shared between Team 1 and Team 2 for each chamber. You have a total of 10 minutes to clear the whole chamber, and so if Team 1 defeats its set of enemies in 1 minute, Team 2 will have 9 minutes to defeat its set of enemies. Getting 3 stars in all chambers generally requires you to defeat all enemies on both Team 1 and Team 2's side within 3 minutes. Chamber 9 and 10 may be within 4 minutes, but within 3 minutes is the general practice. I don't know why miHoYo decided to put the timer at the top of the screen in actual time format, but tell the player how many seconds need to remain. It's kind of a confusing thing. They could have easily done a stopwatch timer at the top of the screen and the challenge description is complete within 3 minutes, but MiHoYo do MiHoYo things. There are no fundamental issues with this system at first glance, but there are longevity issues. For the past 2 years of the game's lifespan, there have only ever been 4 endgame flaws, 9 through 12, and while the enemies change per patch, more floors and higher scaling would give players who can do the current floor 12 blindfolded an actual challenge. Each floor gives the same exact amount of primo gems, even though the later floors are substantially more difficult. The difference between floor 9 and 10 and floor 11 and 12 is night and day. Floor 9 and 10 require absolutely zero thought and can be done with a random assortment of characters, while floor 11 and 12 does require a synergetic team, but all of them give the exact same rewards. This makes it feel like the extra effort and thought put into the later floors just isn't respected and rewarded accordingly. The card buffs you get at the start of each floor aren't random, making it so you can't redo to try to get a better clear time. If the cards for the Abyss just so happen to be 2 to 3 30% defense boosts in a row, or a sprint speed boost, well, that's just unfortunate. And the whole Spiral Abyss reset being fortnightly is very odd. All endgame systems I've ever encountered have been weekly resets, but Genshin has a desire to be the odd one out and have a fortnightly reset. One word explains why this is bad. Rhythm. The reason weekly reset is very good is because the players can get into a rhythm. Every Monday you jump in and do a 15 to 30 minute run of the Spiral Abyss, and this will happen every Monday, and you get into the rhythm of this happening every single Monday. But with the fortnightly reset, one Monday you do it, then the next Monday nothing, and so then you have to actively try to remember which Monday is the reset, or has it reset already? And probably the worst problem the Spiral Abyss has is that it's the only endgame in Genshin Impact. Because it is the only one, it faces all of the game's brutal criticism about endgame content. Genshin has added events that could have easily been turned into endgame systems resetting on a weekly basis, but MiHoYo has missed these opportunities. The biggest was probably the Labyrinth Warriors event, which was, to keep a long story short, an open world Elysian realm where you start a run, walk through a dungeon-like area from room to room connected by paths, each room having a combat challenge, and after you clear the enemies you get a buff card which gave substantially more important and impactful buffs like increased constellation level by 1 or explosive barrels deal 1000 bonus damage. This event was what players wanted from the endgame, but it was never added permanently. You may be able to tell that Genshin's endgame isn't that great, but this video is about looking at Genshin and Honkai's endgame, so let's do just that. Let's now take a look at Honkai Impact. Honkai Impact has a handful of endgame grinding areas that reset weekly, and these consist of the Q Singularis and Q Manifold, which was also known at some point as Dirac Sea or Infinity Abyss, and this is the tower climbing game mode. Memorial Arena is the boss rush game mode. Elysian Realm is another tower climbing game mode, but with a bit more of a twist. There are co-op raids with 3 players going through stages, and to a very big extent, tower climbing game modes in AFO 1 and 2. Let's take a bit of a deeper look into these, starting with the Abyss or Q Singularis and Q Manifold. I won't take a look at Dirac Sea or the Infinity Abyss as they were removed a long time ago. You may be wondering what the difference between Q Singularis and Manifold is, and I'll explain. Manifold is the much simpler one mechanically. You have 10 floors you need to defeat all enemies on, with the final floor having a boss on it, while Singularis is split into 2 different areas, Q Gateway and Q Singularis Abyss, which is the preliminary area before Q Gateway. For Q Singularis, you have 5 floors and have to complete all 5 to continue onto Q Gateway. And then in Q Gateway, you have a total of 7 floors, each with enemies that give points of varying sizes, and the focus of Q Gateway is to accumulate points instead of just clear all floors. Difficulty in Q Singularis is determined by your own input and results. If you do extremely well, then the difficulty will raise and make itself more difficult, and if you do poorly, the difficulty will lower, while Q Manifold's difficulty is determined by the input and results of every player in your current bracket. Speaking of brackets, Singularis is split into 4 level brackets, while Manifold is split into 3 brackets, and this is to separate players of vastly different levels. Singularis has the basic bracket, which is captains level 25 to 55, the elite bracket, which is captain 56 to 69, the Masters bracket, which is 70 to 80, and 81 players don't have a bracket, but a completely different thing called Superstring Dimension. As for Manifold, it has the first 3 brackets, and once you get to level 81, you cannot do Manifold anymore. And even after that, you have smaller brackets within these level brackets to separate the higher and lower skilled players in each level bracket. And these are Original Sin, Agony, and Red Lotus for Q Manifold, and Sinful, Agony, and Red Lotus for Singularis. As for the rewards, they scale with what bracket you are in as well as how well you do. So the better you play, the more you get. I should also mention that you can only play one of these modes per week, either Manifold or Singularis, not both. and there are 2 resets of the whole abyss per week. Now let's move on to Memorial Arena, a slightly simpler game mode to explain. Memorial Arena, or MA, is a boss rush game mode. Per weekly reset, you get a selection of bosses of various types, and you have to put a team together of countering types to then fight that boss a total of 5 times. Each time, the boss increasing in difficulty as well as giving more points and increasing your overall score. When you start fighting a boss with a specific Valkyrie, that Valkyrie, the weapon, and the stigmatas attached to that Valkyrie are locked to that boss, but duplicate weapons and stigmatas can be used. The difficulty of the boss is indicated by the rating shown on their image, ranging from C, B, A, S, and SS. Each one increases boss health and in some cases additional mechanics. And MA is also like Abyss, split into the brackets but only the level brackets. 38 to 55 is basic along with only 2 bosses and 4 attempts per day. 56 to 69 is elites with 2 bosses and 4 attempts per day still. 70 to 80 is masters and you get a total of 3 bosses now with 5 attempts per day. And finally exalted, which is level 81 and plus, and you have 3 bosses and 6 attempts per day. Your rewards come from 3 different areas individually: how many bosses you killed, your total score, and your leaderboard placement. Long story short, MA is just killing one enemy as fast as possible. Elysian Realm, probably the most liked endgame system out of all of them, because it gives the player the most freedom to play how they want and deal massive damage. Like the Abyss, Elysian Realm, or ER, has you go through stages or floors clearing enemies till you get to the end and fight the big bad boss. But earlier I said that ER was a tower climbing game mode with a twist, and that twist is that you need specific Valkyries to even attempt ER. While the list is expanding, it's still quite small compared to the overall roster. And the other twist is that you can only use 1 Valkyrie and 2 support Valkyries that you cannot switch to, but have specific special on-use effects. Let's take a step back and start from the beginning of an ER run. You have to choose which Valkyrie you want to run, and you see which ones are eligible to be used from a massive list. Once you choose your Valkyrie, you need to pick support Valks, which provide various buffs from raw damage increase to enemy gather abilities. You next need to pick a few passive items that provide mid-run bonuses like higher chance for specific doors to appear, and many more very specific items that a whole video could be made explaining just them. And then you need to pick your final item, which is an on-use item. But this is unlocked in ER Chapter 3, and these items are extra on-use to provide massive support or massive damage. And now enter the biggest reason why Elysian Realm is so dearly beloved: the card selection system and the cards themselves. When you hit the start button and enter the first stage, you will be immediately prompted to pick one of 3 cards, and this first set of cards are regarded as Elysia cards. They'll provide some of the biggest gameplay changes to your character, and sometimes fundamentally change how you play certain characters. After you choose a card, you'll be shown a few doors, and this is how you proceed to the next room, and the symbol on the door corresponds to the card choices you will get in the next room. I don't want to go into too much detail about the gameplay and specifics of each symbol, corresponding effects, but in summary, each symbol corresponds to a character, and that character gives you a signet that corresponds to a specific playstyle. An example, Deliverance is Kevin's signet and it boosts ultimate damage. The difficulty and the rewards are determined by you, the player. Before you start a run, you have to choose a difficulty starting from the lowest, which is a 1 times multiplier, all the way up to a 2.7 multiplier. But don't be deceived by the small number increases. The actual difficulty feels like it's 100 times harder, and the rewards bar also feels more the higher difficulty you do. As for raids, this is quite a simple and small one, so I'll mention it really quickly. Raids are 6-stage 3-player co-op game mode that requires you to have at least 3 players. The stages are simple and nothing crazy happens. All you need is 3 players and some stamina to do this. The rewards are the biggest reason to participate in this game mode, as you get divine keys, which are rather strong weapons on the correct characters. And the last endgame system I mentioned earlier was an activity within the open world of AFO 1 and 2. For these 2 open worlds, you have a tower climbing game mode in both, where you play as your characters of choice from AFO, defeat enemies and receive keys as rewards. Then these keys are used in the supply for the respective open world, from which you can get crystals, phase shifters, and supply cards. While these 2 activities are not infinitely repeatable like the Abyss, Memorial Arena, and Elysian Realm, you will do them long enough to get into the habit of doing them. Before we move on to the summary, I want to specifically look at the Primo Gem and Crystal acquisition from the whole endgame in both games. Just how many games respective gems can you get, and how many rolls does that equate to? Genshin has 4 floors that you can farm fortnightly, and to get the max rewards, you need to get 9 stars from each floor, and each floor can give you 150 Primo Gems. So in total, that's 36 stars and 600 Primo Gems every 2 weeks. Doing a single pull in Genshin takes 160 Primo Gems. 600 divided by 160 is 3.75. but having an extra 120 doesn't count as a role, so that is 3. Per fortnight in Genshin Impact, you can get a total of 3 roles, but we can easily convert that into weekly to 1.5 single roles per week. Honkai has the Q Singularis and Q Manifold, and clearing all floors you are able to receive 420 crystals from its highest difficulty. But you have to remember that the Abyss resets twice in 1 week for Honkai, so that makes it 840 crystals per week from Honkai. Memorial Arena can give a total of 120 crystals after killing all bosses a maximum amount of times and getting a high enough score, and Elysian Realm can give a total of 500 crystals if you complete a run on Abstinence difficulty. So if we add them all together, we get a whopping 1,460 crystals per week, which equals a grand 5 single rolls. Now we can summarize. Genshin has one endgame game mode, the Spiral Abyss, which is 4 floors, 12 chambers, and 24 combat sequences with 2 different teams. Difficulty is static due to the cards not being grindable to get better ones, and enemies change once per patch. Rewards are lackluster with only 300 Primo Gems per week, which is about 1.5 rolls, or 600 per Spiral Abyss reset, which is 3 rolls per 2 weeks. Honkai, on the other hand, has 3 primary endgame game modes. Firstly, the Abyss has you clear 10 or 12 floors depending on your choice of Manifold or Singularis. Each reset of the Abyss has a different weather effect which will determine which characters you should use. The Abyss also resets twice a week, so in a week you can get a total of 840 crystals, or in Genshin's reset schedule, 1680. The second and simplest game mode, Memorial Arena, is a boss rush, make a team, and defeat some enemies game mode. As you level up, more bosses can be killed per week, and more enemies are unlocked. This is a very simple game mode which rewards a massive 120 crystals per week. And lastly, the most complex game mode, Elysian Realm, which has you pick one character to run a gauntlet of stages, choosing different buffs per stage. You can select a wide range of difficulties, and completing a run on Abstinence will reward a great and glorious 500 crystals. This is a very, very poor showing from Genshin Impact. And without me even saying, everyone can tell that Honkai Impact does win this one. This video is already rather long, but I'd want to end by explaining why this isn't good for Genshin, and I'll use MMORPGs as an analogy. World of Warcraft was released a long time ago, and it pretty much set a standard for MMORPGs. It set the standard of having many PvE raids, many PvE dungeons, and well-balanced PvP. And so, if an MMORPG doesn't release with at least all 3 of these game modes, or adds them within a timely manner, the game feels lackluster and unfinished. And the analogy can be applied to Genshin and Honkai Impact. Honkai has all of these wonderful systems, and it's the older game, while Genshin is the newer one but has less. Tell me in the comments what you think about the endgame of both Genshin and Honkai. If you have played both, tell me which you prefer. And if you've played one but not the other, tell me if I've convinced you to try or not try the other. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one.